Sir?
Don't move. We have a report of check fraud.
Officer, that is my paycheck. My employee ID is right there. I've banked here 6 years.
Turn around. Hands behind your back.
You can call my company right now. 2 minutes. The check already cleared. I said turn around.
A man walks into his bank, the bank where he has been a customer for 6 years, hands over a check he has handed over at this exact window 156 times before, and gets arrested for it. Kevin Johnson is 35 years old, senior software engineer at one of the largest technology companies in the United States. $185,000 a year. 6 years at this same branch, this same building, these same teller windows. A bi-weekly paycheck that First Central Bank has processed without incident since the day he opened his account. The teller looks at the check, looks at Kevin, calls the manager. The manager looks at the check, looks at Kevin, calls the police. The verification system that could have confirmed the check's legitimacy in 60 seconds sits idle at the teller station, untouched, the entire time. Officer Brian Kowalski, the arresting officer, has 3 prior racial profiling complaints on record. All dismissed. This arrest will hold Kevin in custody for 6 hours and 43 minutes. 5 hours and 42 of those minutes will pass after his check has already cleared. And when the lawsuit is settled, it will cost the bank $9.7 million. Type banking while black if you already know exactly why that check looks suspicious to Sandra Cole. This story proves that in America, a black man's paycheck requires a level of scrutiny that his white colleagues' paychecks will never face. Kevin Johnson did not stumble into software engineering. He built his way there, line by line, year by year, rejection by rejection. The son of a postal worker from Columbus, Ohio, Kevin was the first in his family to earn a computer science degree, then a master's, then a senior engineering role at a company whose products are used by more than 500 million people worldwide. 12 years in the industry, 6 years at his current company. The kind of career that gets described in profiles as a journey. Kevin just called it Tuesday. His title is Senior Software Engineer Level 4. His annual compensation is $185,000. His biweekly net deposit after tax, $7,115, issued on the same schedule from the same Fortune 500 payroll account, bearing the same security watermarks, the same routing number, the same authorized signature from the company's payroll division. Every single time, without variation, for 6 years. He was good at his job, precise, methodical, the kind of engineer colleagues brought their hardest problems to. He had spent 12 years building expertise in systems that required total accuracy, environments where errors had real consequences. He understood documentation. He understood verification. He understood that credentials existed precisely so that identity could be confirmed quickly and cleanly. He had never imagined he would need to explain that to his own bank. Tuesday, March 14th. Kevin wraps up his workday early and runs errands on the way home. Dry cleaner, grocery store, bank. A routine he has repeated enough times that it requires no thought. He opens his account at the Westfield branch of First Central Bank when he was 29 years old, just starting his current role. Since then, he has made 156 identical deposits. The branch's own records show 0 flags, 0 holds, 0 suspicious activity reports. Not once in 6 years had anyone at this branch looked at his check and seen anything other than a routine transaction. He pulls into the First Central parking lot at 3:42 p.m., pay stub in his laptop bag, check in his wallet. He gets in line, nods at the security guard he recognizes by name, approaches the window, hands Sandra Cole the check. He is not nervous. He has no reason to be nervous. He has done this 156 times. Sandra Cole takes the check and looks at it for longer than a check like this has ever required. Then she looks up at Kevin, then back at the check. $7,115. Fortune 500 letterhead. Security strip embedded in the paper. Routing number. Authorized signature from the company's payroll division. She types something into her terminal. Pauses. Types again. then sets the check down and asks quietly where he got it. Kevin does not fully understand the question. He answers it anyway. He tells her it is his paycheck, that he is a software engineer, that he has deposited the same check at the same window for 6 years. Cole nods slowly and picks up the phone. Dale Hutchins has managed this branch for 4 years. In those 4 years, Kevin has made deposits here approximately 96 times. Hutchins has access to the same transaction history Cole does. He also has access to the check verification system built into the branch's own software, a system that can authenticate a Fortune 500 payroll check in under 60 seconds. He does not open it. Instead, he walks to the window, looks at the check, looks at Kevin, and says the check looks suspicious. Kevin opens his laptop bag, lays out his employee ID badge, his most recent pay stub. His phone, open to his account history, 156 deposits, identical amounts, same issuer, clean record going back to account opening. He places everything on the counter in a neat row. Hutchins looks at the documents, does not pick them up, does not examine them, reaches for the phone and calls the police. What Dale Hutchins saw was a large check and a black man. And in the space between those two things, the large check became evidence of something wrong, and the black man became the suspect. The same check, handed over by a white man in business casual, would have been processed in 45 seconds. The verification system Hutchins refused to use would have confirmed its legitimacy before the next customer in line stepped forward. The credentials Kevin offered, a Fortune 500 employee badge, a matching pay stub, 6 years of documented branch history, would have been for anyone else more than sufficient. For Kevin, they became evidence of sophistication. As if a real fraudster would think to bring documentation. Kevin stands at the counter and waits. He has laid out every credential he carries. He has offered the HR phone number. He has pointed to 6 years of identical transactions in his own account history on the screen of his own phone. He has done everything a person is supposed to do when their identity is questioned. None of it has moved Dale Hutchins 1 inch toward the verification system 12 inches from his right hand. 2 officers arrive at 3:58 p.m. Officer Brian Kowalski enters first, hand on his belt, scanning the lobby. Dale Hutchins meets him at the door and says 2 words, check fraud. From that moment, Kevin Johnson is not a customer standing at a counter with his credentials in plain view. He is a suspect. Kowalski approaches and tells Kevin to step back from the counter. Kevin steps back and explains, his paycheck, his employer, his ID badge visible on the counter right there. Kowalski tells him they will look into it. Kevin tells him the branch verification system can confirm the check in 60 seconds, and that the HR number is printed on the back of his badge. Kowalski tells him to come with them while they complete the investigation. Kevin asks if he is being arrested. Kowalski says they are detaining him for questioning. Kevin asks on what basis. The customer behind him speaks up, telling the officers she has seen Kevin in this branch every single week. Kowalski asks her to step back. Kevin makes one final request. Call the HR main line, he says. 2 minutes. That is all he is asking. Kowalski tells him to turn around. The handcuffs click into place at 4:01 p.m. in the lobby of a bank where Kevin Johnson has held an account since he was 29 years old, in front of a teller who has processed his check more times than she has likely seen most of her own family members this year. In front of other customers, several of whom now have their phones out and pointed at the scene unfolding in front of them. Kevin does not shout, does not resist. His jaw is tight and his voice is controlled, but anyone watching the security footage can see exactly what it costs him to maintain that composure. He is running the calculation that every black professional learns to run in moments like this. Not calculating how to prove his innocence, but calculating how to survive the next 5 minutes without this becoming something irreversible. As the second officer takes him by the arm, Kevin speaks one final time. He says clearly and evenly that he wants it on the record that this is racial profiling and that everything happening in this lobby right now is being recorded. Kevin arrives at the precinct at 4:17 p.m., still wearing the clothes he put on for work that morning. Gray blazer, company lanyard still around his neck, the badge now logged as evidence. He is processed, photographed, and placed in a holding room with a metal table and 2 plastic chairs. At 4:19 p.m., 18 minutes after Kevin was handcuffed in the bank lobby, the branch's own check verification system processes the deposit automatically. The result returns in seconds. Valid. Legitimate. The check clears. $7,115 confirmed, funds available. Nobody calls the precinct. Nobody updates the arrest report. Kevin sits in the holding room and does not know. At 4:32 p.m., Detective Sergeant Patricia Okafor picks up Kevin's file. She was not at the bank. She had no involvement in the arrest. She is simply the next person in the rotation. She reads the paperwork, looks at the check, and looks at the employer name printed in the top left corner, one of the largest technology companies in the United States. She picks up the phone and calls the company's HR main line. The call lasts 2 minutes and 11 seconds. Kevin Johnson, employed 6 years, senior software engineer, level 4, biweekly net pay of $7,115. Most recent paycheck issued 3 days prior. Employee ID number matching the badge in the evidence bag on her desk. Employment status, active. Standing, excellent. She pulls the check number through the National Payroll Verification Database. Valid. Issued. Authorized. Already cleared. Okafor sets the phone down and looks at the clock. It is 4:34 p.m. Kevin Johnson has been in custody for 53 minutes. His check cleared 15 minutes ago. Okafor walks into the holding room with the file. Kevin is sitting perfectly straight, hands flat on the table, the ghost of his company lanyard still visible against his shirt, where it had been before they logged it. He looks at her without speaking. She tells him his employment has been verified, the check is cleared, and he is free to go. Kevin looks at her for a long moment and asks how long ago the check cleared. She tells him approximately 15 minutes. The silence that follows holds everything that does not need to be said out loud. But Kevin Johnson is not released at 4:34 p.m. because while Okafor has confirmed his identity and verified the check, Kowalski's arrest report has not been formally closed. The desk sergeant determines that the report must be fully processed before Kevin can be released. Processing requires forms. Forms require a supervisor's signature. The supervisor is in a briefing. Kevin sits in a holding room for 4 more hours after his innocence was confirmed in writing. He is released at 10:01 p.m., 6 hours and 43 minutes after he was handcuffed, 5 hours and 42 minutes after his check cleared. Outside, Kevin's wife has been waiting in a parking lot 2 miles away, having spent the last 6 hours making calls and being told by 3 different people that the investigation was ongoing. Kevin walks out into the night air in his work clothes, stands still for a moment, then takes out his phone and calls her. Inside the precinct, the officer at the front desk uses the word misunderstanding as Kevin collects his belongings. Kevin stops, turns around. He tells the officer that a misunderstanding is when you forget someone's name. What happened today was that he was arrested for depositing a paycheck he had deposited 156 times at the same bank and then held for 6 hours after the check cleared. That is not a misunderstanding. That is racial profiling, and he wants every second of it documented. The next morning, Kevin contacts attorney Marcus Webb, a civil rights lawyer with a record of successful suits against financial institutions and law enforcement for racial discrimination. Webb has litigated cases involving banking discrimination, wrongful arrest, and civil rights violations. He knows the landscape. He knows what evidence wins. He meets with Kevin that afternoon. Kevin brings his employee ID, his pay stubs going back 6 months, his account statements showing 156 identical deposits, and the timestamp showing his check cleared at 4:19 p.m. 18 minutes after the arrest. Webb listens to the full account. Then he asks for the bank's security footage, the body camera footage from both officers, and the branch's internal transaction logs. He requests everything through official channels that day. When the footage arrives 4 days later, Webb watches it without stopping. The check on the counter. The credentials laid out in a row. Hutchins looking at them without picking them up. Hutchins reaching for the phone. Kowalski entering. The handcuffs. The timestamp on the check clearance, 4:19 p.m., against the timestamp on the booking record. He calls Kevin. We have a very strong case. The bank had a verification system it chose not to use. The check cleared 18 minutes after the arrest. Your credentials were on the counter the entire time, and you were held for nearly 6 hours after your innocence was confirmed. This is a civil rights violation, a breach of the Americans with Disabilities Act's public accommodation provisions, and textbook racial discrimination under federal consumer protection law. Kevin asks one question. Will this change anything for the next person? Webb's answer is direct. That is exactly what we are going to fight for. 6 weeks later, 2 lawsuits are filed simultaneously. The first lawsuit is filed against the city and Officer Brian Kowalski, citing civil rights violations under 42 United States Code Section 1983, false arrest, unlawful detention, and deliberate indifference to the constitutional rights of a citizen. The second is filed against First Central Bank, branch manager Dale Hutchins, and teller Sandra Cole, citing racial discrimination under the Civil Rights Act, violation of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, negligent infliction of emotional distress, defamation, and failure to follow the bank's own verification protocols. The evidence is methodically compiled. Bank security footage becomes Exhibit A. Professionally analyzed, timestamped, and annotated. Key moments flagged. 3:43 p.m. Employee ID badge, pay stub, and phone displaying 6 years of deposit history placed on counter by Kevin. 3:44 p.m. Hutchins views documents without handling them. 3:45 p.m. Hutchins picks up phone to call police. 3:58 p.m. Officers arrive. 4:01 p.m. Handcuffs applied. The branch's own verification system log becomes Exhibit B. Timestamp showing automatic check clearance at 4:19 p.m., 18 minutes after arrest. $7,115. Confirmed, legitimate. Funds released. Kevin's complete account history becomes Exhibit C. 156 deposits. Identical amounts. Same issuer. 0 flags. 0 holds. 0 suspicious activity reports. 6 years of clean transactional history at this exact branch. Kevin's employment documentation becomes Exhibit D. 6 years of pay stubs matching the deposited amounts to the dollar. Fortune 500 employee ID. HR verification letter confirming employment, title, and compensation. The same documentation that was on the counter when Hutchins called the police. Officer Kowalski's personnel file becomes Exhibit E. 3 prior complaints of racially motivated stops and detentions. All investigated internally. All dismissed as unfounded or not sustained. All involving black individuals. None resulting in formal disciplinary action. Dale Hutchins' branch management record becomes Exhibit F. 2 prior discrimination complaints filed by black customers at the Westfield branch. Both investigated by the bank's internal compliance team. Both found unsubstantiated. Neither resulting in additional training or protocol review. Expert testimony is secured from 3 specialists. Dr. Angela Morrison, banking operations expert with 25 years of experience in retail financial services, is prepared to testify that the branch verification system available to Hutchins could authenticate a Fortune 500 payroll check in under 60 seconds, and that industry standard protocol requires its use before any fraud report is filed. Her report concludes that Hutchins's decision to call police without first using an available, reliable 60-second verification tool represents a fundamental deviation from standard banking practice that no legitimate professional justification can explain. Professor David Carter, civil rights scholar and former Department of Justice attorney, is prepared to testify about the documented pattern of banking discrimination against black customers, known in the legal literature as banking while black. His analysis of the Westfield branch's complaint history, combined with the documented failure to use available verification tools, establishes a pattern consistent with racially motivated differential treatment. Chief Sandra Reeves, retired police chief with 32 years of law enforcement experience, is prepared to testify on the use of force and detention standards. Her report states that detaining an individual for 6 hours and 42 minutes after the alleged offense has been verified as non-existent through the department's own investigative process is indefensible under any standard of reasonable policing. There is no protocol, she writes, that justifies continued detention when the basis for arrest has been eliminated. None. The deposition of Dale Hutchins takes place 9 months after the incident. Attorney Webb conducts it in a conference room with Kevin present. Webb asks Hutchins to walk through the moment he first saw the check. Hutchins describes looking at the amount and the name of the issuing company. Webb asks if he recognized the company. Hutchins says yes. Webb asks if a check from that company, for that amount, representing a standard bi-weekly paycheck for a senior technology employee, struck him as inherently implausible. Hutchins pauses, then says it just didn't look right. Webb asks what specifically did not look right. Hutchins cannot say. Webb asks whether Hutchins opened the branch's check verification system before calling police. Hutchins says he did not. Webb asks why not. Hutchins says he felt the situation warranted a different response. Webb asks what situation. A man at the teller window with his employee ID, his pay stub, and 6 years of account history visible on his own phone. What situation exactly warranted skipping a 60-second verification and calling the police instead? Hutchins has no answer. Webb places the security footage timestamp on the table. Check clearance, 4:19 p.m. Arrest, 4:01 p.m. He asks Hutchins to confirm that the check he called fraudulent was confirmed legitimate 18 minutes after the arrest. Hutchins confirms it. Webb asks him to look at the security footage still showing Kevin's credentials laid out on the counter. He asks Hutchins whether he picked up the employee ID badge at any point before calling the police. Hutchins says he does not recall. Webb asks whether he picked up the pay stub. Hutchins says he does not recall. Webb asks whether he used the verification system. Hutchins says no. Would you have made the same call, Webb asks, if the customer handing you that check had been white? Hutchins does not answer. The city's attorneys begin settlement discussions 3 weeks later. 14 months after the incident, both cases settle. $9.7 million total. $2.1 million against the city and Officer Kowalski. $800,000 directly to Kevin for civil rights violations, false arrest, and unlawful detention. $1.3 million in punitive damages, specifically structured by the court to reflect the department's documented pattern of dismissing racial profiling complaints against Kowalski without thorough investigation. $7.6 million against First Central Bank. $1.2 million in compensatory damages covering emotional distress, reputational harm, and professional disruption. $6.4 million in punitive damages, the largest punitive award against a retail bank branch in the state's history, specifically reflecting the bank's failure to use its own verification systems and its repeated dismissal of discrimination complaints from black customers at the same branch. Sandra Cole is terminated. Dale Hutchins is terminated, named personally in the civil judgment, and required to complete 120 hours of civil rights and fair lending training as a condition of any future employment in financial services. Officer Kowalski receives a 60-day suspension without pay, mandatory bias intervention training, and the first formal disciplinary notation in 4 complaints. The internal affairs officers who dismissed his 3 prior complaints are formally reprimanded and required to undergo procedural retraining. The Department of Justice opens a pattern and practice investigation into First Central Bank's fraud reporting procedures. The investigation finds systemic failures. No mandatory verification protocol before police contact. No documentation requirement for fraud suspicion. No supervisory review of discrimination complaints at the branch level. And no training on recognizing or preventing racially disparate treatment of customers. A DOJ consent decree mandates reforms across all 812 First Central branches nationwide. Before any customer can be reported to law enforcement for suspected check fraud, a branch manager must run the check through the automated verification system, cross-reference the customer's deposit history, and obtain sign-off from a regional compliance officer. The policy is not discretionary. It is documented, audited, and reported quarterly to the Board of Directors. The Westfield Police Department implements a new detention standard. Any individual must be released immediately upon verification that the alleged offense did not occur, regardless of whether associated paperwork has been formally closed. State Representative James Okafor introduces the Customer Protection and Anti-Discrimination Banking Act, requiring all state-chartered financial institutions to document the basis for any fraud report involving a customer with prior transaction history at the same branch, and to use available electronic verification tools before initiating law enforcement contact. The bill passes with bipartisan support. Signed into law 7 months after the settlement. 6 months after the settlement, Kevin Johnson is back at work. Still a senior software engineer, still at the same company. Still writing the same code, solving the same problems, earning the same salary. He does not bank at First Central anymore. He used a portion of the settlement to establish the Johnson Financial Rights Initiative, a nonprofit providing free legal assistance to individuals who face racial discrimination in banking and financial services. In its first 4 months, the initiative receives over 200 inquiries. Kevin hires 3 attorneys. The caseload grows every week. He also becomes a consultant to financial institutions implementing anti-discrimination training programs. He walks bank managers through the body camera footage, shows them the credentials on the counter, shows them the verification system timestamp, shows them the gap between 4:01 p.m. and 4:19 p.m. 18 minutes that cost the bank $9.7 million and could have been avoided in 60 seconds. The most common question managers ask is some version of, "How do we make sure this never happens in our branch?" Kevin's answer is the same every time. You already have the tools. The verification system exists. The account history exists. The documentation exists. Dale Hutchins had everything he needed to resolve that situation in 60 seconds. He chose not to use it. The question you should be asking is why? And the answer to that question is the training your staff actually needs. Officer Paulson later gives a deposition in which he acknowledges that he did not attempt to verify Kevin's credentials before making the arrest, and that, in retrospect, he cannot articulate a specific reason why the check appeared fraudulent to him, beyond the general statement that it seemed off. He is asked whether a white customer presenting the same credentials would have produced the same response. He says he does not know. Kevin's response when told about the deposition is measured. He says he believes Kowalski may genuinely not know the answer to that question. And that is precisely the problem. Bias does not always announce itself. Sometimes it just feels like instinct. And when instinct is never examined, never trained against, never held accountable, it costs people their freedom. It cost me 6 hours and 43 minutes and $9.7 million to force that examination. The next person should not have to pay that price. $8.7 million. Sorry, $9.7 million bought mandatory verification protocols. Terminations. A historic punitive award. Policy reforms across 812 bank branches. A state law that will prevent the next customer from being arrested before the bank uses the tools already available to it. But it did not change what happened in the 3 seconds between Sandra Cole looking at the check and looking at Kevin. It did not change the calculation Dale Hutchins ran when he saw a large dollar amount and a black face and decided, without touching a single verification tool, that the police were the appropriate response. It did not give Kevin back the 6 hours, or the mugshot, or the phone call to his wife from a police station parking lot, or the moment he had to walk back into his workplace and be the person that story happened to. The settlement made that calculation expensive. Publicly, historically, structurally expensive. It forced an 800-branch institution to rebuild its fraud reporting process from scratch. It put a state law on the books. It put Kowalski's pattern on paper for the first time in 4 attempts. But it did not change who gets the benefit of the doubt at a bank window. It did not change who is assumed to be a customer and who is assumed to be a threat. It did not change the fact that Kevin Johnson walked in with 6 years of documented history, a Fortune 500 employee badge, a matching pay stub, and 156 clean transactions. And none of it was enough to outweigh what Sandra Cole thought she saw when she looked up from that check. The system became more expensive. It did not become more just. Kevin Johnson is a senior software engineer at one of the largest technology companies in the world. $185,000 a year, 6-year customer, 156 identical deposits, credentials on the counter, HR verified in 2 minutes and 11 seconds, check cleared in 18 minutes. He was held for 6 hours and 43 minutes. So here is my question. If 6 years of documented history, a Fortune 500 employee badge, and a matching pay stub cannot prevent a black man from being arrested at his own bank, what would have been enough? Should banks face criminal liability, not just civil liability, when they call police without first using the verification tools already available to them? And should there be a federal standard requiring immediate release when documentation has already proven the alleged offense never occurred? Share your thoughts in the comments. This story proves that credentials do not protect you from bias. Documentation does not protect you from bias. 6 years of demonstrated loyalty does not protect you from bias, but it also proves that patterns can be exposed, that institutions can be forced to change, that fighting back, methodically, publicly, and on the record, matters. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next story.